Welcome to the Rotary Club of Milwaukee, where leaders make a difference. And welcome to each and every one of you on this absolutely fabulous day on the 1st of November in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm so glad you could all be with us today. I'm Nancy Sennett, the current president of the club. We're going to begin our program in just about 5 minutes. Please use this time to complete your conversations, get yourself a cup of coffee and a taste of dessert, and then we will begin our program. Thank you. Will you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And if you would remain standing, I'm now going to ask Karen Hung, the CEO and founder of Silver Rock Consulting, to lead us in our invocation. Karen?
Thank you, President Nancy. Given our esteemed panel of law enforcement and other community leaders today, I thought it'd be appropriate for us to reflect on peace, for ultimately their role is public safety and ultimately public peace. So let us reflect on a verse in the Bible, James 3:18. Peacemakers who sow peace reap a harvest of righteousness.
Thank you, Karen. I would like to welcome all of our guests to Rotary today, our visiting Rotarians, our guests of Rotarians, and particularly those members and guests of the Milwaukee Press Club who have joined us today for our important discussion. Let's start today with welcoming a new member, and for that I'm going to call on Jim Barry, our past president and president of the Barry Company, who will introduce our new member, Derek Goodman.
Thank you. Fellow Rotarians, it is my great pleasure to introduce Derek Goodman as the newest member of our Rotary Club. Derek is an attorney at Goodman Law Offices, where he practices in the areas of real estate, bankruptcy, and litigation. He has previous legal experience working on the Wisconsin Court of Appeals and for the Milwaukee County District Attorney's Office. Derek serves on the board of the Bayview Community Center and the Board of Jewish Family Services. He is active in the Milwaukee Bar Association, Wisconsin Hispanic Lawyers Association, the American Inns of Court, and serves as a volunteer at the Marquette Law Legal Clinic. Derek grew up in Milwaukee and attended the University of Wisconsin, Madison, and the University of Wisconsin Law School. Derek and his wife Rebecca were just married in October in a very joyful celebration, and they live on the east side of Milwaukee. I've known Derek and his family for a long time, and I'm confident that Derek will be a wonderful member of Rotary. He also will be one of our younger members. He finally stopped calling me Mr. Barry a few years ago. He still refers to President Nancy as Mrs. Senate, but we'll change that. As Derek steps forth to state his name and classification, let's give him a warm Rotary welcome.
Thank you all for having me. I'm very excited to be a new member and very much look forward to my new membership as a Rotarian. Thank you.
Welcome, Derek. We're really pleased to have you here. And now I'm going to call on Latoya Dennis, the club president of the Press Club and a reporter for WUWM Milwaukee Public Radio, to the stage to say a few words of welcome on behalf of the Press Club and then to introduce our program. Thank you, Latoya.
Good afternoon. The Milwaukee Press Club is delighted to again join with Rotary for today's Newsmaker Luncheon, which is sponsored by the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Today's topic, how to fix a broken police department, is probably more important than it's been, if not ever, than in decades. Across the country, people are demanding change, and police forces are saying, hey, we're dealing with a lot. So, to lead the discussion, I'd like to bring up Dave Haynes, the editorial page editor for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel.
And I'd like to ask our panelists to come up. Al, Kathy, and Iris. We promise we'll let you finish lunch after this is all over.
Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I don't think it will surprise anyone to hear that for years in Milwaukee, the police department has had a rather fraught relationship with our community, especially communities of color. That certainly was part of what was behind the disturbances last summer in Sherman Park. But Milwaukee is not unique in this regard. Major cities across the country have experienced similar problems. That certainly has been the case in Cincinnati. But in Cincinnati, a group of people came together after some very serious problems and came up with a different sort of policing. Today we're going to hear about that. We're going to hear about the benefits of problem-oriented policing from three people who have been at the forefront of that effort in Cincinnati. I'd like to thank them for coming to visit with us here today and thank the Greater Milwaukee Foundation for underwriting their travel to Milwaukee. So let me introduce our panel. On my immediate right is Kathy Harrell. Kathy is the past president of the Fraternal Order of Police, Queen City Lodge number 69, and she is a Cincinnati police officer. Kathy, welcome. Next is Iris Rowley, who is a project manager for Black United Front, the lead complainant in a lawsuit against Cincinnati. She led the effort to collect the testimonies of more than 3,500 African Americans who said they had been victims of police brutality, racial profiling, or misconduct. She's a contributor to the Collaborative Agreement and a member of the Chief of Police's External Advisory Board. Welcome, Iris. And Al Gerardstein is the attorney and partner in Gerardstein and Branch Company in Cincinnati. He's testified before President Obama's 21st Century Police Task Force. He was the principal author of the Cincinnati Collaborative Agreement between the City of Cincinnati, the police union, and the community. I'm going to let the panel take it from here, and I'll come back for questions.
Make sure you say something.
All right.
Iris just wanted to point out that she also testified
And
before
so
the
did
21st
Kathy.
Century Policing Task Force.
We can't just let him get on.
That's
board.
right.
Go ahead, you start.
Again, thanks for allowing us to be here today. My name is Kathy Harrell. I was the union president for the Cincinnati Police Department from December of 2005, and after 10 lovely years, that ended in December of 2015. We're here to discuss the Federal Collaborative in Cincinnati, how it came about, why we believe that it was a tremendous effort by all involved, and that we believe our city is a better city because of it. I can tell you I got hired by the Cincinnati Police Department in 1987. I had worked in several different districts. I was in the city's drug units. And during the time of the unrest, I was actually a neighborhood officer and had been a neighborhood officer in community policing for about 7 years. I was on the executive board for the Cincinnati FOP, in its position that's elected by Cincinnati police officers. I wasn't the president at the time, but I was just sitting on the board. Being on the board prior to the unrest, the only way I knew Al Gerhardstein was he was suing about 20 to 25 of our police officers on a monthly basis on civil rights violations. So that's the relationship that I had with Al Gerhardstein. Iris Rowley was protesting. We would be on police lines where she would be there protesting and standing up for what she believed in, and that's how I knew Iris Rowley. Our attorney, Don Harden, who recently passed away, had been working with Al in reference to a lot of officer-involved deaths in the Cincinnati Police Department. And this idea of this federal collaborative had come about, and Don Harden came to the executive board, to the FOP, saying, I believe the union needs to be at the table, which had been unheard of. It's not happened since. Took it to the membership for a vote, because what we were going to do and what we're asking our members to do is to allow us to use their money, to have an attorney sit at a table when a lot of those officers felt as if they did nothing wrong, they didn't police wrong, they weren't racially biased, they weren't policing racially biased, myself being one of them, and I was a no vote to sit at the table. At that time, not knowing that I would be the future president of the FOP. So when that happened, I got a hold of Don Harden and said, what are these all-party meetings I keep hearing about? He goes, well, why do you want to know? I said, well, because as the president, don't I have to go to one? And he says, Kathy, we've never had the president sit there, which absolutely I found absurd. So I started going to the all-party meetings, taking an interest in it. And the thing that I think was surprising to everyone at this table, as well as the federal monitor and the citizens, is the Cincinnati police officers wanted change. What I think a lot of people did not understand or realize is the average officer on the beat, working in a district or whatever assignment they're in, they are policing based on how they are trained to police. They're following policies and procedures. They're doing what their supervisors tell them to do on a daily basis. And our officers wanted change, but there was no one they could tell or talk to about wanting that change. We had officers, you keep hearing about community policing, community-oriented policing. Well, for those of us that have been around a while, that was just a good beat cop. They were doing those things. They just weren't writing it down. There wasn't a block to take credit for working with the community or helping out a family or taking care of a project in your neighborhood, whether it be, drug dealing, some type of crime, helping out a family. As part of this federal collaborative, and what really brought about officer buy-in was the fact that when they came in, and I'll probably get to this, but we wanted to make sure that we used the word federal collaborative. We went to court to make sure that that's what it was called, because it was a very collaborative approach. But I think one of the things that really got the officers, and believe me, it wasn't easy at first. And a lot of people were like, well, after that, you probably had tons of people calling you and complaining to you. I get that from a lot of officers around the country, and actually I didn't. Because a lot of the changes that had occurred within the police department were needed. It made their jobs easier. Everyone thought, because of the federal collaborative with the in-car cameras, they're not going to want the in-car cameras. The in-car cameras did not hurt us. They helped us. When there were complaints made about officers, those cameras helped us. When there were questions about the way we policed, they helped us. We were able to get tasers. Tasers were extremely important at that time, because prior to that, we had so many lawsuits against our officers because of excessive use of force, civil rights violations, but because it doesn't look very good to citizens when you have an officer and a citizen on the ground fighting. But because of those tasers, injuries to officers decreased, injuries to prisoners decreased, there were less lawsuits, less money that the city was paying, less taxpayer money that was being spent. So those also helped us. Some of the things that occurred from the beginning was that the officers, I think, found very helpful, is they actually brought the police officers in for meetings. And it was made very clear that no supervisors could be present. So it was just police officers, police specialists in these meetings being asked questions about what they felt was wrong within the police department, the changes that needed to occur, what some of those issues were. They also met with and brought in our families, which a lot of people thought, well, why would they do that? But the families and what they had to say, the spouses, husbands, wives, children, had a lot to offer to those that were interviewing us as far as what were some of the concerns that officers had, what were they bringing home. Going to the communities, we went to so many community meetings every week, explaining to the community exactly what it was that police officers did, why we did it the way we were doing it, what the current changes were going to be with contact cards, accountability for stops. I could go on and on. I will tell you that after about the first year being involved in the federal collaborative and it coming to an end, very few officers really had any concern about being part of the federal collaborative. It wasn't anything that seemed very drastic or different. We always had to go to yearly training. There were just different things that were now put into the training curriculum. We changed the way we taught our incoming new recruits. We brought in different type of community-oriented policing curriculum within the academy, diversity training, actually got them out of the academy and into the streets and working with the citizens before they even got out of the academy. The thing I can say that was very important for us and a change that we saw, which some people don't see around this country, which I still believe we do have in Cincinnati, is I think that the large majority of our citizens do have trust in our police department. We had a Citizens Complaint Authority that came about because of the federal collaborative, where citizens could file complaints on police officers and it wasn't being handled by internal. Because a lot of people thought that investigations that were being conducted by internal were biased. They were basically covering up for officers. So what ended up happening was this Citizens Complaint Authority. And being the union president, we worked very closely with the Citizens Complaint Authority. And when our officers would have a complaint made by a citizen, they had to respond to the Citizens Complaint Authority and answer questions there like they would if it was an internal. And those findings are within their records. They're made public. They're put out every single year, which that doesn't necessarily make all officers happy. But as far as the citizens go, that is something that they can look at and see. There's monthly public hearings on them. They're televised on city cable for citizens to look at and watch and listen. It was a very long process. It was not an easy process. We're not here to get you to think this is going to happen overnight. It was a very long process. It's a process that still takes place today. We have the federal collaborative, but there are things within that federal collaborative that we've got to make sure that we have a commitment to. But what people don't understand is when there's changes in administrations, there's changes in policies and direction that chiefs go in. We had a police chief at the time in the administration, and sitting at that table, I can say this because I was there, so I'm not basing my rumors on anything else. I saw it. That was not being completely truthful to those at the table. Whether it be the Federal Monitor, the Black United Front, Al Gerhardstein, myself as a union member, making statements at those all-party meetings that I knew from having been on the street as well as being the representative for over 1,100 police officers that were totally inaccurate. And there was a point to where we had to understand and realize there was not time for that anymore. There had to be change. It was necessary. It was needed, especially if we were going to excel as a police department or as a city. And I think the one thing that was very important is because of that and sitting at that table and going to those community meetings and having interest in what was going on, it gave me a completely different perspective of the citizens' concerns, and I think they understood ours as well.
Okay. So we're in a room of suits. And those of you in suits normally want to control things. And when you control things, you think you can buy a solution. And if you throw enough money at it, it should get fixed, right? Just like in your companies and in your efforts elsewhere. And the first thing we learned when we did the collaborative is that that's not going to happen. There can't be a top-down solution to police reform. And having sued the police officers for more than 20 years before we started the collaborative effort, this was very frustrating to me because I'm a trial lawyer, so I like to control things too. But what we really learned through the collaborative process was just that, a process that was started with listening. And Iris and the Black United Front did a great job of bringing to the table the over-policed community, the folks that were on the picket lines that were very, very angry. And our goal, and they were my clients, I was the plaintiff's lawyer, our goal was to make sure that we heard everybody. So we had 8 stakeholder groups, the police officers and their spouses, police administration, the black community, and other minority groups, do-gooders, church leaders, corporate leaders, a lot of different stakeholder groups that all answered 3 questions. What is my vision for police-community relations? Why do I care about it? And how would I go about doing it? And those conversations, first in their stakeholder groups and then in mixed groups, were all captured by good note takers, and the data was collected, and using good qualitative research techniques, it was mined to get the themes. And then there was a very detailed and facilitated process for coming to 5 consensus goals, which frame our entire collaborative agreement. And while we have hundreds of paragraphs in the collaborative agreement, we all tried to make sure that those paragraphs addressed one of those 5 goals. And then we went back to those 8 stakeholder groups and said, is this what you were saying? Is this what you meant? Is this where, you know, are your goals here? Do you still recognize what it is you thought you wanted? And that's a big risk because normally lawsuits have 2 parties. And I represented one party and the city was the other party, and then we had opened it up to all these other interlopers who didn't really have a normal seat at the table. But we knew that this type of social problem actually needed a much broader umbrella. And everybody did recognize their goals in this agreement. And then when we presented it to the court, we had thought leaders from those different groups. We had the Archbishop testifying. We had black ministers testifying. We had a lot of people from these different stakeholder groups step up and say, yes, this is what we want for policing. Now, typically what happens when you enter into an agreement like this is that the city will slow walk the plaintiffs to get to a period when they can be declared in substantial compliance, which is the technical term. But we weren't looking for that. We didn't really just want to do a report card where details were checked off. We really wanted to change the culture. And over the 6 years of court supervision, 1/3 of the police department was hired. And one of the outcome measures that you won't see directly in the collaborative agreement, but what Iris and I pledged to our client group, was that we were going to reduce arrests. You cannot talk to black people who come from a history of oppression by police in our country and the use of police for oppressive purposes and say that we're going to police just the way we've always done it. And that was a debate in the initial years of the collaborative. There was a big commitment among some in the police department to continue some zero tolerance policing. We had a Vortex unit, 50 officers, that would go to any hot spot, and when they got to a spot where there was a spike in crime, they'd jump out and arrest everybody there and shake down everybody who wasn't doing any felony, but maybe they were jaywalking or maybe they were loitering, and they were doing zero tolerance policing. A technique that requires a lot of police resources, that takes a lot of black people into the criminal justice system, that swells jails. Early on, we used to have 2 jails in Cincinnati. There was an 800-bed jail, the Queensgate Jail, that had to close because it was a warehouse, literally, and they needed to convert it, needed to tear it down because it wasn't habitable. And so there was a bond issue. You know, are we going to build a new jail? We got 800 beds we got to fill. And the response was, no, we don't need any more jails. And we actually voted not to build a jail. And that was a big deal because we were doing problem solving. And problem solving, which this community is very familiar with, is a technique where you don't commit to use arrests as your primary mode for addressing crime and disorder. Rather, you look at the repeat perpetrators, the repeat victims, and the repeat locations. And if you've got a location, a hot spot, rather than jump out and arrest everybody in sight, you might want to change the lighting. You might want to bring together all of the people who have a stake in that location, tenants, property, contiguous property owners, and others who have a stake in it, and say, all right, what do you think we ought to do? Maybe different departments like traffic, and maybe move the traffic pattern, maybe harden the doors, maybe train the landlord to pick different people. Do things other than arrest that reduce the hospitality of that property to crime without increasing arrests. In the last 15 years, we have cut arrests in Cincinnati using problem solving in half, both for felonies and for misdemeanors, which is a big deal. Now, thank you. But we still are looking to do even more. And we're still looking for a way to communicate with the over-policed community that this even happened. We have a very active Black Lives Matters movement that doesn't know much about the collaborative in Cincinnati and isn't talking very much to us, which is a very interesting dynamic. And we have, as we sit here today, opening statements in a murder trial going on in Cincinnati where a University of Cincinnati police officer shot Sam DuBose about a year ago, and he's being tried for murder. Right now, opening statements are underway, and the whole city's on edge. I mean, our city isn't immune from the tensions that triggered our riot back in 2001, and it's not going to be immune, going forward. But there are a lot of people, and I agree with Kathy, that have come to learn that the police in many instances can be trusted. And that's what we're trying to do, is build a philosophy of transparency. I mean, we don't hide our videotapes. When there's an officer-involved shooting, 24 hours, within 24 hours, there's going to be a press conference. We're all going to see the video. We're all going to know what we know and also explain what we don't. And the police, it's not unusual for the chief to say, I don't know all the facts about what happened yesterday. Here's what I do know. There was one guy, this is what he did, this is what the officer did, and I'll keep you in tune. And there's also a very active group of people who are on regular communications with the police department and with the city leadership, so that there's no gap in the information. And that's a very, very important part of the collaborative. So as we have gone forward with the collaborative reforms, we have tried to keep that transparency as a primary goal and that trust building as a primary goal. Our agreement is the only one in the country where the FOP was a party to it, and I think that's critical. Our agreement is also, in our court-supervised agreement, was the only one in the country where the community was a party to the same litigation that the Justice Department brought. And we shared a monitoring team, so that when the Justice Department left in 2008, those of us who were involved in the private side of that lawsuit knew what the elements were of the police reform we had put in place. We didn't have somebody come in from outer space, fix our police department, and leave. Rather, we all had a whole bunch of people who were engaged then and have stayed engaged since. There are 17 cities under DOJ consent decrees now, and we're eager to see those and other cities develop this sort of expertise within the community, so that this police reform mandate comes from the ground up. And that's going to mean broadening the net of people who really, really commit to working with the police and doing reform. It's been a great journey, and it's been frustrating, but it's also been very rewarding, and I'm sure we'll be answering questions soon. Go ahead, Iris.
Thank you, Al. So you two have heard from the most capable, thought-provoking, forward-thinking civil rights attorney in the country, Al Gerhartstein. And so, yes. He won't tell you, but he's won a suit in the Supreme Court. It was his case, marriage equality. And I sit next to Kathy Harold, who was the first female president of the FOP in the city, and she's absolutely right. We had to grow up at the table. When we started our federal lawsuit in 2001, when we decided that we were going to focus on police after 2 and 24 in the city of Cincinnati, we had to grow up as a community to determine what it was that we wanted. And we did it very deliberately and with a whole lot of intent and focus, and with the blessing of the community. As Kathy said, we had many, many community forums. We had to open up our conversation, not just to the Black community, but to all of the community. So I want to thank the Milwaukee Rotary Club for having us here today. And I want to thank the Milwaukee Press Club for being here today, because press plays an important role in the process. What we figured out in Cincinnati in 15 years is that it is more than just policing. There are other systems that play into this. There are other avenues that you need to look at. When you look at what problem solving can do, it takes away from just police. Communities misuse police. Politicians misuse police. And sometimes police allow themselves to be misused. We hear police telling us 15 years later what we know in Cincinnati is that they can't do it all, and we should stop expecting for them to. So I appreciate the room full of people, and I especially appreciate the press for being here, because you play a very critical role from this point forward. How you tell a story, how much investigative journalism that you do, how that you are fair and that you put it out there so that everyone can make a fair assessment of what's happening, so that everyone can move forward together. In 15 years, We've done work in the city of Cincinnati that I have to be proud of. I have to now call Cincinnati my home. Before this process, I did not, and I was born and raised in the city of Cincinnati, third generation. So when you're somewhere and you're feeling as though your voice is not being heard, lives are not being respected, resources don't come your way into your community, you get what we got in the city of Cincinnati in 2001. It was a culmination of all of those things, not just bad policing or bad community and police relationships. It's all of those things. So just don't look to fix your police department. Look to fix multiple things. Look to make sure that your community is not just engaged when